Shit. Wait, hold on. Looking for my, what's the name real quick. Hey, I got it. Hey, let's start up real quick. You know what I'm saying? That's crazy. Hold up. Give me 1 second real quick. Hey, better ones. There we go. Alright. Let me see what we got. Damn, Curry. That's crazy. Computer score first. There we go. You got me one real quick too. Hey. Come on, man. Supposed to make that shit. Frustration foul. Dude be getting a hella block. For real. Let's see what we got. See what we can do. Why ain't you trying to guard me so tight anyway? I'm just a mid-range shooter. Oh. Oh. Like I said, why he trying to guard me so tight, though? Hey. All right, next one is a regular fade. That's a hop. Oh. There we go. Good defense. Don't foul him. That wasn't me that time. I done missed a few. I just say that's a bad shot. Hey, let me go all the way. I was about to say I needed that layup. Okay, I'm not trying to play good defense. Let's see what we got. A little bit of Manly P. Hall for a second. Hold on. Let's see what we got.
The reluctance that we have to assume that other peoples or other ages have had knowledge that was important. We more or less hate to admit this. We like to feel that we are unique in every field of discovery. And some East Indian scholar and scientist, in this case Nobel Prize winner, tells us that the Hindus were using electricity and making batteries 7,000 years ago. We are more than astonished. We are humiliated. We are offended. It is a personal grievance. And the first thing we must do is to prove that it is not true. It is to us more important to disprove these things than to investigate them. A small opening has been made in this wall of attitude on the level of medicine. Here we observe more and more expeditions going out into the field to study primitive medicine among aboriginal, savage peoples. And from some groups and tribes that are still, or up to recently have been, headhunters, we have made important medical discoveries. We have learned of herbs and simples, of various materials used to combat specific ailments. And out of the primitive lore of the medicine man, the voodoo doctor, and the juju magician, we are gaining information that will help Americans to live longer. At first, this was also so humiliating, no one dared to think about it. Today, however, we have a slightly improved attitude because we are all uncomfortable and are seeking remedies. And it has dawned upon us that it is better to have the remedy than keep the prejudice. It took a long time to get this far. This may be termed a major step in culture, a step towards better times for all of us. The development of psychology has brought with it considerable interest in the intangible sources of human energy supply. It has caused us to become aware of this dream life behind the individual and the classification, as we have advanced it, of the various forms of phenomena emerging from man or moving through man has increased our respect for the mysterious plus X in the root of man. At one time we were certain that this selfhood in man was nothing more or less than the byproduct of irritation in the cerebral processes. That the individual, becoming mad enough, became a person. We are not quite certain of this anymore either. We are beginning to think more and more in terms of the person living in the body. And we have suddenly come to the realization that an unseen, invisible, immeasurable quantity, which we call self in man, is responsible not only for his actions, but for this vast and wonderful conglomeration of attainments which we call the modern way of life. We are suddenly realizing that the skyscraper, that the atomic projectile, the airplane, all of these things emerge from something scientifically beyond access. That from man, as an invisible core, something not to be weighed or analyzed chemically, there is flowing constantly streams of inspiration, intuition, knowledge, thought, reason, and ingenuity, which pay off in terms of immense discoveries, tremendous conveniences, and innumerable inconveniences. Whatever this is in man is not an unmixed blessing. It is capable not only of making a tremendous contribution but of gradually transforming man into the problem child of history. With this gradually increasing respect for invisibles, science must ultimately turn its attention to new levels of demonstration. It must discover new sciences of itself, or restore them out of the past, by means of which it can approach reasonably, rationally, and so far as is possible scientifically, the mystery of the invisible at the root of all visible things in nature. Until it achieves this, it can never move from the sphere of effects to the world of causes. And all effects are suspended from adequate causes in nature. We like to think, of course, that visible effects are practical and invisible causes are impractical. Yet how shall we say that that is impractical, which though unseen becomes the power behind all practical works and labors? It is like some mysterious moral force, like man's urge to love. We cannot define it, we cannot explain it.
Right.
But whatever good we have in our world has come from it. And the failure of this is the most dismal failure that can occur within the structure of human life. So we have these intangibles, and we must approach them scientifically. We must have something more than a grand admiration. We must be able to learn useful ways, useful applications, and also a proper framework upon which to build a common science of human understanding. Going back, therefore, to this rejected field of what we might almost call astrophysics, we are astonished to find a carefully organized field of symbols, of emblems and figures, of processes and formulas that have come down from the past. It would be astonishing indeed if so many thoughtful persons over so many thousands of years should have been completely addicted to a chimera. It is almost incredible that we could have so scientifically organized imagination. And at the same time, all things have to be tested by their utilities. And it is hard also to imagine that something which had no foundation in fact and was merely a flight of imagination could possibly have sustained itself so long in common admiration, nor could it have vindicated itself as frequently as it has done by the accuracy of its methods and pronouncements. Thus we are in the presence of something, and in the study of ourselves, we discover that these ancient peoples evolved a very comprehensive idea. We do not have to accept it, but I think it is time for us to examine it and try to discover, if possible, whether we are in the presence of a valuable key. Certainly, these people taught, these old stargazers taught thousands of years ago that what we call the empty air around us is actually a kind of channel through which energy is continuously moving. They taught us this while for the most part we had the dimmest concept of the meaning of energy. They believed, and in practice still apply the belief, that man is in the midst of an immense complex of forces, and that in some mysterious way these forces converge upon his internal life, and that from this convergence there are modifications in his nature and temperament, by means of which his outer life is also conditioned. Perhaps one of the simplest ways of trying to understand this is by the recognition of certain common, observable phenomena. Most persons are aware of the old family almanac, which was of the greatest meaning and significance to our farmer ancestors. The farmer secured his annual almanac with religious devotion and dedication. Back in the beginning of our national life, Benjamin Franklin printed the almanac, and George Washington bought it in order to use it in the maintenance of his plantation. Men like Washington and Jefferson and Hamilton would not for a moment have thought that it was possible to maintain a farm without an almanac. Now, this almanac contained a quantity of astronomically and astrologically calculated information relating to planting, relating to the harvesting, and of course also to the general climatic condition of the year. Some of you probably have known farming people. Perhaps were raised on farms yourselves. And it would be quite obvious that a shrewd and canny farmer, and farmers are not foolish, would not have for years depended upon these almanacs for the regulation of his planting and protection against sudden inclemency of weather, unless he had justified to himself that it worked. These people were shrewd. They were not even wasting 5 cents on an almanac, unless it meant something. And they certainly would not follow it long if the result was the loss of their crops.
Right.
But that these things actually did have bearing upon planting has later been proved under scientific conditions in Arizona, where planting various vegetables at different phases of the moon shows distinct effect. That these influences do have some bearing. St. Thomas Aquinas, the great Catholic philosopher of the Middle Ages, pointed out that it would be incredible to assume that the moon, which it has the power to draw the waters of the earth and to establish the tidal rhythm of the seas, that such a powerful influence has no effect on anything except water. Assuming also that it had no effect upon anything except water, let us remember that the human body is over 85% water. If it can move the tides, this lunar influence, has it any effect upon the liquids and humus of the human body? Studying tree rings, we observe distinctly the cycles of sunspot maxima in the tree. And it is possible to find out from the study of tree rings the dating on cycles of sunspot maxima. Of course, we have easier ways of dating, but it could be done by that means. Is it conceivable, therefore, that a force which will leave a continuous and almost indestructible record of itself within the heavy woody fiber of a tree, that this has no effect on anything else? We know also the effect of these motions of energy in space upon the great cycles of financial adversity and promotion in the affairs of men. It has been noted for years that the stock exchange, both the one in England and the one in the United States, the principal stock exchanges, all can be graphed according to planetary and luminary cycles. Now, even if we wish to assume that the planets have no effect upon man and only on the stock exchange, can you imagine anyone who is not affected, directly or indirectly? Whenever we come to this recognition, we must come also into the realization of the interdependence of living things. And we must realize that anything or any force which can change the fur on rabbits or can result in the development of these tree ring circles must influence profoundly the interior energies of something. It is difficult to assume that all this influence is merely from the outside. We are not able at any moment to check this influence. But after a period of years, we perceive it. And we are suddenly aware of a very subtle form of energy, modifying the conditions under which we exist. The Greeks held to this concept also, and Plato's great cyclic year, and his various periods of alternating fertility and sterility, by means of which the cultures of humanity are so profoundly affected. These observations remain true. The various phenomena which Plato described actually occur. But how shall we understand it? Not having a better explanation, is it conceivable that he could have been right, as he was in so many things? Could a man whose knowledge of politics, government, human philosophy, and religion be as profound as it was, and have survived so long to our admiration, been completely naive in something else of equal importance? It is hard to imagine that he could have been. And certainly we have no right to take it for granted. We must therefore at least make honest investigation. This brings us perhaps to one of our important psychological points. Namely, that as we know from the seasons, that the energy availability differs at different parts of the year due to the inclination of the Earth's axis. We know that this is true because we can watch the coming of winter, and we can watch its disappearance again after the vernal equinox. We see the larger part of the Earth affected by this. We measure it in terms of human adjustment and non-adjustment. And today, parts of our eastern seaboard are blanketed in snow. We are not so blanketed here. Other parts of the world are now preparing for the glories of summer, such as our neighbors in Australia. These differences, we know, are due to astronomical phenomena. And we know that these differences affect the birth rate. We know they affect the death rate. And we recognize that untimely situations arising in the world's climate affect us economically, in the destruction of crops, affect us in the terms of health. Any physician will point out to you the seasonal epidemics. Also, we know the vulnerability of the sick, and we recognize that millions of people today are leaving extreme climates and gathering in our own delightful Southern California smog-infested atmosphere because they are tired of facing pneumonia every winter. This situation is obviously the result of a chemistry of universal factors. If the sun were not where it is, if the planets were not where they are, and if the Earth was not in its present position among them, this entire group of circumstances would be totally changed. And man himself could do nothing about it.
Right.
For in the presence of these elements, man as a person is hopeless and helpless. That these things, therefore, pound upon his outer life, we know. So we are presented at this time with two possible psychological schools of thought. One is that the effect of universal energy modifications upon man are due first to the effect upon his environment. There is no doubt that religions are the results of longitude and latitude. If the Finns had not lived where they lived, they would not have given us that beautiful classical, religious, mythological poem, the Kalevala. If the Hindus had not been exactly where they were, they would not have given us the peculiar interpretation of Hinduism that we have today. If the Japanese had lived somewhere else or under different conditions, they would not have had the peculiar flowery arts with which we associate them. Thus, the distribution
17 East Monroe Street,
of climate,
Chicago,
may definitely and does certainly affect body structure, social adjustment, degree of activity. It has a strong effect upon ambitions, motivations, and upon the contemplative interior life of the person. Thus, if man is the result of the town in which he lives, the books he reads, the friends he meets, and the relatives he has accumulated, so he is also subject to the seasons, the weather, the climate, the terrain in which he exists. Mountain people are different from valley people. And it is quite conceivable that this vast, intangible atmosphere, which is actually constantly modifying our way of life, may also be moving in upon us as a psychological factor in our temperament and our disposition. Thus, merely the fact that the sun and the moon and the stars are in the sky has affected us. It has affected our religions, and in turn these have moved our living. The contemplation of the sunset affects man. Whether we wish to say it is the sunset itself or the contemplation of it may be a psychological point, but it has had its effect and has come down to us in the personification of the sunset in a whole cycle of gods and goddesses and heroes. These in turn have affected our moral lives. And to a measure, our moral lives are in continuous and stressful relationship with economic existence.
Right.
These things
definitely
affect. Consequently, if we wish to say that the universe produced the environment by which man is what he is, we are only making another statement of the power of universals upon the life of individuals. Now we know that man's actual existence, along with the existence of everything else that does exist, is due to participation in a life principle that through man constantly something electric, magnetic, some strange life fluid essence pours and flows continuously. That in this essence also man has his existence, in the light and the air and space around him. For every part of himself that is tied to the earth, there are countless parts tied to space. We have become so accustomed to watch our feet and think of the solid earth beneath as a symbol of all reality, that we have forgotten that were we and are we separated from the space energy by which life is maintained, we will simply and do simply pitch forward upon the earth dead. Thus our lives come to us out of life itself. And how shall we observe or assume that life reaches us? Are we to follow with the ancients that believe that the life of man really originates in the living spiritual being that ensouls the planet? Or are we willing or more inclined to assume that it arises from the tremendous energy fields in which this planet floats, suspended itself by one of the greatest mysteries of energy and motion? Thus assuming, and we must assume, we have no choice, that our energies, by which we can lift a hand, read a book, take a step, that these energies are invisible but absolutely real, and that without these energies we have no achievement, no existence possible. We have the telephone, we have the instrument on the wall or on our desk, We know that it is tied with a mass of wires and a network of stations and substations to phones all over the world. Yet if the current that moves within these wires and carries the message ceases, the telephone ceases to be important, although its physical structure remains undisturbed. It ceases to live. It is dead. Therefore, the energy which we cannot see is really a kind of divine power. And the instrument made for that energy is our acceptance of the reality of that power and our desire to build a house for it, whereby it can live with us and serve us. But the instrument is the servant of the energy. Without the energy, the instrument is meaningless. And in the same way, the human body, about which we boast so much and so continuously, is an instrument. And without the energy that ensouls it, it is meaningless. It is unable to achieve any of the purposes for which it is intended. Now, we have not yet reached a point in popular thinking where it has occurred to us that this energy upon which we live may come to us in a conditioned form. We are fully aware that there are many energies in space, that there are planetary rays, solar rays, cosmic rays. We are now recognizing that we have a universe like a very intricately woven fabric, the very substances of this fabric being composed of energy. That this energy is subject to innumerable laws of its own kind, and that there is also various adjustments and conflicts between the laws of energy and the laws of matter. These facts are dimly coming to our attention. But now comes the gravest question that we know. This energy stream that sustains us, is it a pure, unconditioned stream? Is there nothing between this life principle and body? If there is anything between, what is it? Is there some reason, some archetypal pattern governing the distribution of this energy according to laws, according to principles, according to values? If such government exists, in what is it posited? What is the universal machinery by means of which the specializations, diversifications of energy are possible? We know that the orderly progression of seasons means that this energy is subject to mutation. It is subject to being more or less available. We cannot say that the energy itself is more or less. But we do know that in a given area, at a given time, the energy allotment may be reasonably determined. That this allotment is not continuously identical with itself. That in some areas the allotment is greater than in others. And that this allotment is governed by laws of periodicity. Consequently, we have evidence, physical evidence, to prove that the flowing of this energy into form is subject to laws. That it is not just simply a great sea in which we all swim, but that it is a kind of ocean in which there are innumerable currents. And therefore, that because of the infinite diversity of the sea itself.
Alright, hold on. I got some other shit I wanted to watch real quick, too.
17 East Monroe Street, Chicago, Illinois. We have the Palmer House Hotel, where we are told that there have been multiple. 17 East Monroe Street, Chicago, Illinois. We have the Palmer House Hotel, where we are told that there have been multiple Palmer House hotels on this exact same site. When the first Palmer House was built as a wedding present in September of 1870, because we all know that building a massive hotel in downtown Chicago and giving it away as a wedding present in the 1800s was very normal. This was a common gesture back then, and you're gonna wanna stay around to the end when we tie this entire thing together and find something awesome that connects with this city and everything that we found. So this hotel present opens up in 1870, with no issues, of course. All of the horses pulled the stone to the site perfectly, and they all did their part. And the very next year, it of course burns down in the Great Chicago Bomb. Oh, did I say bomb? Well, they tell us that it was a fire, but I don't believe that these great fires were actually fires. This looks to me like these so-called great fires in every single city in the world, basically. You can go ahead and look it up. It happened in a city near you. These were actually bombs, in my opinion. The destruction was something that a fire alone could never accomplish, especially when we are given the fire story from the National Geographic Society that the Chicago fire bomb started by accidentally knocking over a lantern when running away from a card game. And this causes the entire city to burn down. Stone buildings that look like palaces. I think we all know that this is ridiculous at this point. Could you imagine if someone in your neighborhood's house started on fire and that fire burns down your entire neighborhood? No. And not to mention that all of the houses would have been built with brick and stone, materials that don't burn down to the ground from house fires. Let's take a look at the destruction again, where they tell us that this is the ruins of the first Palmer House. And for one, are we 100% sure that this photo is showing us the destruction of the first Palmer House? And for two, is this even Chicago? Could this be a random street in Germany right after they bombed it? And for three, take a look at those buildings in the background. This is from a tipped over lantern? Or is it more possible that we are being lied to? The buildings are just ripped apart. They're shredded and smashed. And we know you can't burn down stone and brick buildings from a simple house fire. They don't get anywhere near hot enough. This is exactly why you put stone around the fire pit. You make stone and brick fireplaces inside your house, right inside your living room, and nobody panics. It doesn't spread into your kitchen or into your neighbor's house. It doesn't crumble and look like it exploded. Are you seeing the lie very clearly now? Now let's go deeper. Now they tell us that this photo is the second Palmer House that was constructed on the same site as the first one. And before we go on, they tell us that this was completed just 4 years after the Chicago firebomb by Donkeys Incorporated with the help from their horse and wagon community. They just cleaned up that old one that was exploded all over the place. They moved all the broken stone and cleared off a solid, nice, and level spot for a brand new foundation. In just 4 years, no problem. They built this after the fire. Take a look at these horses and wagons, right next to the completed palace. Built in less than 4 years? And honestly, it looks like it's been there for a long time. We had these wood planks set up that they would use to go from the paved sidewalk from the old world to these dirt roads. If this horse and wagon community built these sidewalks, they would have just built a ramp leading to the dirt with the same sidewalk material. But they didn't. They went and got a wood plank because that was what they were capable of in that time period. They were capable of a wood plank as their ramp to walk from the sidewalk to the dirt road. They found these buildings and they were occupying the old world civilization's work. And we're still doing this today, all over the world. In 1870, the first Palmer House was completed. In 1871, a year later, a tipped over lantern and tons of bombs go off and destroy the whole city. Now the whole city was destroyed. And I'm only bringing this up because it's to show what our civilization today is capable of so that we can compare. We had to clean up Ground Zero in New York. But it took our civilization within the last 25 years, 8 months to clean up 2 buildings. So in 1871, how long do you think it would take those horse and wagons, realistically, without massive equipment? How long would it take them to clean this up? Not 8 months. I can guarantee you that. It would have taken them years. So now knowing this information, here we go. We are told that they cleaned up this entire site. They planned out a new one with perfection. They made sure they had the right construction team picked out. They planned out the materials. They had enough horses and wagons to pull the stone and marble. Everything else they needed to do, permits and everything, and get this second building done in 1875. Completed in 1875. From the point of the fire to the completion date, only taking 4 years. With Chicago winters being brutal, we know that this is logistically impossible, and they give us this nice photo of it, when today, we don't build any 7-story palaces in less than 4 years. And that's not including the entire cleanup project from the fire bombs going off in 1871 all over downtown Chicago. Oh, did I forget to mention that this AI-generated story just couldn't help itself but throw another fire into this paragraph, saying that this was the world's only fireproof hotel and built with perfection and with rapid speeds in the 1800s. Hotel. And get this, 1920 hits. So this building is supposedly only 45 years old at this point. We have supposedly the world's first and only fireproof building. And please just look at this thing again. We can see for ourselves. Does this look like a building that's going to go out of date in 45 years? No, of course it doesn't. Well, they demolished it and make the third Palmer House on the exact same site. Unbelievable. This time, it only took them 2 years to get done. They tell us that this is the first one and that this is the second one. And now with everything that we know that the narrative is ridiculous and a total lie at this point. So let's ask a massive question here. Do you think it's possible that these photos of these two buildings were just photos of other buildings around Chicago or even in different cities that they just knocked down and threw them into this story? It seems like it to me. They had a lot of buildings to get rid of to start this reset, and this seems like the most logical explanation in my opinion. Use one building to explain away all of these other old world buildings that are no longer here. And this third Palmer House Hotel is just built on top of an old world structure. You can see the difference between the old world construction on the bottom and our bland brick style, where it almost looks like they threw a layer of brick over the top of the old world's work. There were a lot of buildings in Shalaga that needed to be destroyed. We found a lot more stuff today, and we're just getting started, like I said earlier. Let's take a minute and thank all the people that keep this channel running and help it grow to new people every week. Welcome to episode 58 of my lunch break. I hope you're all having a great day. Tight. And if you're new, welcome. Oneg and VKH Bonner. You guys are all awesome and helping this channel out a lot. So this Palmer House Hotel all happened because of this Potter Palmer guy, supposedly. And this guy is pinned as the guy that developed Lakeshore Drive and worked with another character that got a lot of old world buildings pinned to his name. As we have shown, Marshall Field, where this guy got the Field Museum, where they also got to share the department store chain, the Marshall Field Company, along with this other guy, Levi Leiter, which we can look into in another episode. I'm sure he's got the exact same kind of stuff going on. My point for coming back to this Potter Palmer was because he got to live in this castle mansion. And it's an obvious old world castle that was once located on North Lakeshore Drive, Chicago. Did you know Chicago had castles? And this one was supposedly constructed in just 3 years, from 1882 to 1885, by the Cobb and Frost firm, which we have gone over. We know that they are characters as well. The castle in Chicago, destroyed in 1950. The thing was only 65 years old. I'm gonna ask you guys, do castles go out of date in 65 years? The last time I checked, they don't. I mean, even the houses that we build today with their vinyl siding that fall off once a year when the wind blows. These houses don't even go out of date in just 65 years. Yet, a massive castle thrown together in 3 years in the 1800s that looks like it's straight out of a Disney movie. That one goes out of style in just 65 years. They must have looked at it with disgust in that time period. Their standards were just so high while riding around on their donkeys, located in Chicago, Illinois. While they're also over there, just a couple blocks down, gifting old world hotels, all pinned to this Potter Palmer guy. It's amazing. What a time to be alive in the 1800s. You get free hotels and castles everywhere. You know what? I was thinking about it. Let's just go see what this Levi Leiter guy was all about. He also got to live in an old world mansion. They tell us that this one was constructed in 1891. That's the only construction details that they give us on this mansion, where we have seen in previous episodes that they know all about the year -300, over 2,300 years ago. They give us these ridiculous stories about construction, but in 1891, there's nothing. The 55-room marble stairway with a great hall mansion was, of course, taken over by the U.S. government and then demolished just 56 years after it was built because there was nothing to see there. No. And this whole project, we are told, started in 1891, where the old world building that had white marble ceilings, an elaborate fireplace, carved woodwork, because this was very normal stuff in the 1800s. Anybody could have done that. They don't even care to mention who that would have been. They knocked out that hand-carved woodwork that they only needed for 56 years. They start the project in 1891, where he buys the land on June 12th. We are being told that they still haven't started the construction because they finally get the permit. We already know this thing is done in 1893, so they better get going on it. We only got 18 months to work with now. So they get this Theo guy picked out, where they give us a list of other buildings to investigate because this St. Thomas Church is also destroyed. So we get stained glass windows, a marble stairway, hand-carved woodwork, marble ceilings with zero information as to where all of this material even came from. We are told, and we are supposed to believe, that this 55-room masterpiece is done in less than 18 months. When they tell us it was done at some point in 1893, where they decide that it's just not cutting it anymore, and they all agree to knock it down just 56 years later. In a realistic world where everybody is thinking logically, this is a story for a baby. We don't build places today in 18 months and then knock them down in just 56 years. And they didn't do that in the 1800s either. This building was here much longer than we were being told. And this very wealthy individual was clearly a part of a group that allowed him to occupy this old world mansion. And then this is where they give us a clue for us to dig deeper. The clue is Theo Chandler, where they tell us that he designed this castle that got destroyed after just 56 years of use. Well, he also had a few other things attached to his name that should open a few eyes. First of all, he is off supposedly designing a brand new castle in Newcastle County, and they name it the Courthouse. A new castle located in a county called New Castle in the USA, where it only got to stand for 40 years. At this point, alarms should be going off. A very clear pattern with these specific characters, where they are pinned to these old world buildings that hold narratives of incredible construction projects that are being destroyed after such a short amount of time. If we are advancing and times are easier now, we are better at construction now versus the 1800s. Why would they be knocking these type of structures down after just 40 years when we are clearly more advanced in the 1800s in nearly every single aspect, including training processes? We have established construction teams. We have incredible equipment, tools, and resources. And we would never do this. We would never knock this building down after just 40 years. Our towns build the ugliest buildings with basic materials and basic boring 90-degree angles. They look like boxes. Yet when the 1800s supposedly build a courthouse, it's a masterpiece that they could afford to and all agree to knock down. It's completely backwards and it isn't logical. Something much deeper is going on, and we know here that these are destruction projects to remove buildings that were previously here, built by a much more advanced civilization, and not built by Theo, while he's over there directing the project from inside his wagon carriage behind his horse on the dirt road. So let's take a look at what's really being said here. The building stood for just 40 years, which we know here that is not true. It was here much longer than that, and I need to make that clear. But they say that this was the best known building in the city, adding to the point that nobody would ever knock this thing down. The best known building in the city? After just 40 years, that's the time to blow it up? And this part of the paragraph is very interesting in my opinion, where they say, even if very few people now know what used to stand there, and this goes for the whole world, we really don't know what was knocked down before we were born. How long have they been knocking down buildings? 200 years? 300 years? We know, and we have documented many times, that they are still destroying these buildings today. But in the 1800s, there was no way to communicate this to thousands and millions of people, to let everybody know that this is happening in their town, and so that everyone could share that it was also happening in their town at the exact same time. They didn't have internet. I believe this was all taken away before 1776 and slowly given back to us. From that point on, the only news that anyone had that was being shared with the population was all controlled. And it seems like our ancestors from the 1800s were all just under their spell, and nobody could see what was going on around them and what the controllers were doing. And it also seems like up until just a few years ago, this was still going on. Just destroying a lot of the old world's work, with nobody really realizing it. So here we have a destruction photo from 1919, where we are told, and are being made to believe, that only 39 years after its construction, the basically brand new, incredible stone structure was out of date and needed to be torn down. We know that this thing was much older, and as we've said, nobody is knocking this thing down after just 39 years. We are also told that the writer of this article thinks that many people who watched it get knocked down also watched it get built, which is simply not the case. And this is a demolition, a planned demolition. It was torn down. There was no fire. Take a look at the structure. And now let's look at the Palmer House from earlier. They look exactly the same. They both look like they've been destroyed on purpose, proving my point that no fire took down these buildings. Either it was a planned bomb in all of these cities with the Great Fire bombs, or they were just going door to door using high velocity explosives. And this brings up something that I've been thinking a lot about. We have all of these stories about these buildings that were knocked down, but it does make you think about how many buildings were destroyed before 1800 that we don't have any narratives or photos of, and they were just wiped out. Buildings that weren't classified as courthouses, but just regular stores, to create a new timeline and new narratives. Just based on these incredible mansions, hotels, castles, and courthouses in the USA that were demolished, it makes you really think and wonder if Budapest, the way that every single building basically looks like it's straight out of the old world, it makes you think, did nearly every single city in the world at one point before their Great Fire date look exactly like Budapest? And the buildings that made it through the main destruction on that Great Fire date, these were the structures that needed to be explained away in a false narrative and fit into our timeline for a 39-year gap and tossed out before anyone really noticed it. And now for the bonus today. We have the Symphony Center, a music complex located at 220 South Michigan Avenue. And before we dive into this bonus, I want to make sure that we take a minute and thank all of our badge members, all of our Patreons, and every single subscriber. You guys are all awesome and really helping this channel. I also want to say that this channel just hit the 1 year mark. A year ago, I put out the first episode while on my lunch break. I had built up a lot of information that I felt shouldn't just be inside my head and felt like it needed to be out there for others to hear. I was researching the old world and had previously learned through the years how to edit videos. So I thought maybe a few people would want to hear the information that I found. Little did I know that it would be millions, hitting over 4 million views in the first year. I think the coolest part about this is that we all know that we are not alone anymore. And there are literally millions of other people out there that are interested in finding the truth. And so many people that understand that there was a previous civilization and that the mainstream timeline is fabricated and that the mainstream history that we've all been force-fed since day one is a complete lie. And we're just getting started with this channel. Just knowing that there are millions of new people out there that are about to find out about this topic within this upcoming year of episodes is really cool. And I really look forward to seeing where we're at this time next year. Thank you to everyone here for all of your support, all of your comments, and for liking the episodes and sharing them. I couldn't have asked for a better first year of the channel, and this is just the beginning. Now that that's been said, here we go. a building that is here for everyone to see. In Chicago, Illinois, a building that holds a 2,522-seat orchestra hall, a rehearsal hall and performance space, a ballroom, an event space that overlooks Michigan Avenue, and the Art Institute of Chicago that holds a multi-story rotunda. And for the best part of the story and the clear giveaway, this building, we are told, had its construction begin in May of 1904 and held its first concert that same exact year in December of 1904, over 120 years ago. All of this getting done in 7 months. That would be incredible if it was true. And we don't get the fire narrative here, but we do get an architect with the name Daniel Burnham. Burn. Really. It's just unbelievable. The amount of times that the narrative just throws something about burning or fires or destruction into these narratives. Burnham. Doesn't get any better than that. Well, besides the F.L. Ames character that we found in episode 50. Things that nobody noticed before, but they are very clear to us now, thankfully. Now, with a name like that attached to this kind of building, built in 7 months, 120 years ago, I think that qualifies for an investigation of Mr. Burnham, where he is pinned as a repeated failure. And I know I've seen this movie before, when they tell us that Abe Lincoln failed at everything and then became a hero. It has been used many, many times by the narrator. They pin this Byrne guy as the creator of the tallest building in Chicago in 1881, the Montauk Building, where in 1881, forget about sleep, forget about freezing winters, get your horses to the site and get this building done. Built in a year, from 1882 to 1883. This thing is done. The tallest building in Chicago. And you know what they gotta do? They gotta knock it down in 1902. That is literally 19 years later. Is anybody on the fence at this point? Well, if you are, this is gonna help you get off the fence and over to our side. Let's have some fun. The guy with fire in his name, Burnham, went on to build more of the first American skyscrapers, such as the Masonic Temple Building in Chicago, measuring 21 stories, 302 feet. This character knocked this thing out from 1891 to 1892. This was simple stuff back then. And knocking it down in 1939. But they could knock that one down because they had a new location and opened that one up in 1926, supposedly. And this new one holds the deadliest theater fire and the deadliest single building fire in U.S. history. After this fire killed 600 people. So we get the fire and the destruction of lives, where they say that this doubled the death toll of the Chicago Great Fire, which is weird because according to the National Geographic Society, the Chicago Great Fire destroyed 17,500 buildings. Only 120 bodies were recovered and 300 people died, where we can all do the math and see that this does not add up for one building to hold more deaths than 17,500 buildings, and that there is a massive, massive lie just waiting for all of us to uncover it.
Sense, man. But that's what they say, you know what I mean? What can I say about that? Finish this game real quick. Burnham.
A photo and a picture is worth more than 1,000 words, they say, and it's true. You see, compare the left to the right, and you say, "Wow, a tree stump." And then is this mountain, be it like a tabletop mountain or like a mountain that shows hexagons, or a mountain that's broken because of a tornado or like a storm. But you see the photos and you say, the giant trees or the Titan trees. This is a tree stump, your typical tree stump. This photo is like very famous on the internet right now. This is your typical tree stump in our typical forests, with the rings, as you can see on the top, the rings in a concentric way. And then we go to places like what we call the frozen places in the world, and you ask the question, are these just icebergs, or there's something to do with trees or maybe even buildings, you know? But let's move on. These are the sequoias. Now this has been a normal thing to do in the world in between 1870 and 1920. In those 50 to 60 years at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, this is what our humanity did to the sequoia trees. And I'm showing you this here because it's important to make the difference between a normal tree we have today in our forests, the sequoia, which are still based on the same principle as the normal trees we have today, and then the giant petrified trees, which are a totally different species, which are just left now as mountains sometimes in a hexagonal shape or tabletop mountains, etc. Now, you ask the question, why did our human species do this to the sequoias and to the trees? You know, lots of people lived from this. Is General Sherman. It's probably the most famous sequoia left in the world. Touristic place. We say, why did they do this? Well, I guess in those days there were no laws, no rules, and you just had to do what you had to do to put bread and water on the table to live. And this is the typical stuff in the 1800s and 1900s, the end of 18 and beginning of 19. Now let's move on to this. Because you speak about petrification, right? Something organic becoming petrified. Now, I don't know if this is an artistic creation or if it's actually an octopus which was petrified.
Right.
And there's the mystery of how something can be petrified, being organic matter, just like trees.
Exactly.
Because trees, these sequoias, are organic and they rot because they're based on carbon. But kind of like sad, you know, when I see this, I just ask myself the question, how would have I been back in the day if I was a guy, a man with a family, and I had to bring money home and put food on the table, and this was the only word. Do you know how many people lived from this? Like so many of the people employed in the States, in America and Canada, they lived like this for generations. Now we have to understand one thing when we speak about natural wonders of the world. There's this photo of the Grand Canyon and the one similar in the deserts. Do they portray a natural wonder, or they portray something like desolation and destruction? And what's left afterwards? Well, you know how the deserts in the world are. Some of the deserts, they show giant trees or melted buildings. Interesting are these craters. There's nothing on top. You would expect something like a huge rock, right? But it's nothing. So what are they in the end? And we have then the Petrified Forest National Park in the States, and it's unique in the world. I'm sure there's more of these places, maybe in remote areas we don't even know about, but this is petrified. It's even called Petrified Park. So how can you have this something and even cut, you know? So which means that at some point there's a specific species of different type of trees that have nothing to do with our carbon-based trees. This is our typical tree. And you're gonna say, I know what you're gonna show right now. You're gonna show the the Devil Tower, right? The famous one in the Steven Spielberg movie. Now, you look at this,
Right.
and you look at this. What's more left to analyze? You're gonna say, no, you're going way beyond the levels of being crazy. Hey, look at how they're bent, you know, these hexagonal shapes, and this is typical from nature, from a tree. When you go down towards the floor, towards the soil, and they get bent just like the tree stumps in our trees today. And they're hexagonal in shape. Lava from volcanoes and magma does not get solid like this against density. I'm not even gonna say gravity anymore, I'm gonna say density. You cannot have lava doing this. By the way, Vibes of Cosmos, in his last book, he explains everything what lava and volcanoes are and earthquakes, and gosh, the explanations are so awesome and so intelligent. You finally understand everything in place. once you have the big picture and the photos and everything else, and you analyze things how they should be. Now, in the world, as you know, there's academics and people who dedicate their lives to analyze trees, the rings and the fibers, and this is like your typical stuff when you do a cut and you have your tree stump or your vegetation or whatever. So then you have this in the world,
Botany, I think it's called,
which are hexagons, the same as these ones. It's exactly, well, hexagons are like, you know, the typical geometrical shapes. So why? So macro and micro, same level, as above so below, as they say, or something like that. But yeah, this is, well, the typical giant causeway. Again, these are like just the most famous ones. I did make more videos in the past showing many more places in the world, not to mention the ones on the bottom of the ocean floor. Many of the islands in the world have this type of shapes, and it's truly fascinating. So again, not to say that all of the mountains are like this, but there's a huge amount of mountains in the world that are like this.
Right.
I've made several videos about this. Now, this is important because this shows us that even before the era of, you know, what we call the 1800s with the buildings that we've shown in so many videos and the giants, there was something before this. And just like in the Avatar movies, who knows how old this world is, and who knows how many species of trees and humanities lived here before. Now, also remember what happens in the ice areas and the frozen areas in the world. And the Gleason map that usually shows a perfect circle, don't take that as something put in stone, because once you study the moon being the X-ray of the Earth and what Vibes of Cosmos presents, there's way more to explore than just your typical perfect circle ice wall. And let me finish the video with something that it's probably sad, but we have to acknowledge it to understand where we come from and what kind of humanity we are. We, the people, why do we have these photos in the 1800s but not before? So the first records of humanity destroying the sequoias and the big trees, even in Australia, because we usually speak about the USA, but we have Australia, which is a major incident in this case of people cutting the trees, and also Russia. So why do we have these? Why did people do this? And they did this between 1870 to 1920, a very specific time period. They could have started way before doing this and cutting everything, but they didn't. So putting this into perspective with the repopulation, with the incubators, with the first humans coming into place after 1850, and having the mud floods and the roads being with dirt and the big buildings being abandoned, and these trees were therefore, I mean, you go to a forest today, and I went to forests, and the trees are all about 150 years old. That's the maximum. Even like, I'm not speaking about specific trees, I'm speaking about a forest. So the big majority of forests are 150, 170 years old. And the trees are small. So they're like our size compared in proportion of the width. These ones, they're very big. So you can imagine how many years it took these trees to grow. So the question is, where was humanity? If humanity was so focused on cutting all of them in 50 years between the late 1900s and early 20th century. Right. Fascinating. I hope you enjoyed. And let's finish. Remember, you just have to look at.
On that note, I'm gonna holler at y'all later too. Peace.